Hello friend, welcome back to Locally Raised. It's pumpkin day. I've been harvesting pumpkins from the garden. I've still got a lot more out there and I am ready to turn them into some food for my family. I think I actually grew too many pumpkins. I didn't really know how much each plant would produce. This is my first year growing pumpkin, so we're going to try out a lot of ways to use them today. I'm going to make something to sip, something sweet, and something savory. But first, let me take you back to last night and show you how I process these pumpkins into puree. I started out cutting each pumpkin in half and scooping out the seeds. I later roasted the seeds with salt and garlic powder and onion powder. They made a really tasty snack. It was perfect for sending with my daughter to school. She actually told me she couldn't wait to tell her friends that she'd grown the seeds she was eating. I don't know if homegrown pumpkin seeds are really bragging rights in kindergarten, but I thought it was pretty cute. Next, he's got a generous slather of olive oil, and then they went flush side down into my roasting pan. You could also use a cookie sheet lined with parchment paper. We poked holes in the rinds to allow heat to penetrate. This is my daughter's favorite job. And then into the oven they went at 400 degrees. It took about 45 minutes for them to finish. When they're ready, the rind should be soft, like you could poke it through with a fork. Then the flesh went into the blender and was blended into puree. The rinds went to the chickens. Because they've been cooked so soft, the chickens were able to eat all of the rind. Look at this beautiful bowl of puree. This is 2.5 pumpkins that have been processed, and I probably have, I don't know, a dozen or more. And so I've been amazed how much I have to use. I'm just going to give this a stir to reincorporate some of that water that's separated out. We probably won't use all of this today, but fortunately puree freezes well, so I'll freeze what we don't use. We're going to start with a pumpkin chai latte. This is becoming one of my favorite morning drinks. I've been looking forward to sipping on this while I make the other things we're going to do this morning. This is 1.5 cups of water. I'm tripling this recipe so that John and I can each have a generous mug. And I'm going to bring that to a boil. Now that my water is boiling, I'm going to add 2 bags of chai, and I'm going to let that steep for 4 minutes. Just kidding, I meant to add 3 tea bags. There's the third. Forgot I'm tripling. Now I will steep for 4 minutes. All right, it's done steeping. I'm going to squeeze the last little bit of essence out of these. It's a little tricky to do while reaching around my camera. There we go. Now I've got chai tea and I'm ready for the rest of the ingredients. So starting with milk. Of course you can use almond milk or oat milk if you don't like dairy. This will definitely taste better with more fat. So I'm using whole milk. If you want a milk alternative, I think oat milk would be best in this. There's 1.5 cups of milk. Now because I'm tripling, I need 6 tablespoons pumpkin puree. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is sweetened with maple syrup or honey. I think maple syrup goes really well. This is our maple syrup quantity. Goes really well with pumpkin flavor. I like maple better than honey. So that's my choice. That's the route I'm gonna go. I need 3 tablespoons. Next, we're going to add some pumpkin pie spice. I've just bought some, but you can also make it if that's what you're into. I might make some at some point. Right now, this is convenient. So I need 3/4 tablespoon because I'm tripling. Getting out pumpkin pie spice makes me feel like it's really fall. That's not the kind of thing I use over the summer. Next, we're adding some vanilla. I recently ran out of my homemade vanilla, so I'm back to store-bought. And I'm doing 3/4 teaspoon, a dash of salt. The next ingredient is optional. I'm going to add arrowroot powder because it does thicken just a bit. But if that's not something you normally use, I don't know that I'd buy it for this recipe. I don't think the difference is that big. I happen to have it on hand and use it anyways, so it's worth it to me to put it in. Finally, I'm going to blend this and then heat it up so it's hot and ready to serve. You could do this in a blender or a bullet. I think that might actually be a little frothier, but I like that I don't have to dirty another pot. If I blend it in this, I can heat it in this, and I'm ready to go. That works for me. Now I'm going to heat it up. Heating it up will activate that arrowroot so that it thickens. And of course, we want it hot to drink. Look at that, it's frothy, it's hot, it's ready. Gonna pour it up. Oh, we do have a little bit extra. Maybe the triple batch was a lot. John. John. It is a full other serving yet.
Great. I'll drink it later.
Okay. Cheers, Jenny. It is good. Now it's time to move on to pumpkin cheesecake. This recipe is supposed to start with making the crust, but I just realized I'm out of butter. I made a shopping trip for this baking day and got all kinds of ingredients and forgot butter. So John's out getting that. We're gonna make the filling first. I made this cheesecake last year and I loved it. I think it's one of my favorite cheesecakes I've had. So I knew that that was one I wanted to make this year. I'm gonna freeze this for Thanksgiving. It freezes well. So I'm hosting my family this year. It'll be perfect to just already have this in the freezer and know that something is already done for Thanksgiving. Hosting is only fun for me if I do a lot of the work ahead of time because I just can't juggle the day of. So this way I'll be able to enjoy myself. Right now I'm putting 4 blocks of cream cheese into the mixer. I got these out first thing this morning when I woke up because they need to be room temperature. So much cream cheese. I mean, I know that's the name of the cake, but still, I was surprised when I remembered that I need 4 blocks for this. I like how cheesecake is a sweet cake, but it also has other flavors. I like that little tang of cream cheese in it. That's the sweet spot for me in terms of a dessert. I want sweet plus something else. Tangy or tart or even salty. Then I need some sugar. I have an Azure order coming on Friday this week. I get my sugar from Azure, so I'm pretty low, but I hope we've got 1.5 cups here. I say this every time I use this sugar in a video, but I really love Azure sugar. You'll see it's kind of a little bit golden. It's less processed, so it still has some of that sort of molasses flavor. I think it's a more interesting flavor than your standard bleached white sugar. Oh, good. We just made it. The cream cheese and sugar need about 2 minutes to cream together on high, so this is a good chance to clean up a little bit and get out the rest of my ingredients. Next, I'm adding sour cream. That was a 1/3 cup. and a teaspoon of vanilla. And I'll whip that again, or I'll combine. Now it's ready for eggs. The eggs are supposed to be at room temperature. I used to have trouble, Sally's baking addiction recipes always call for room temperature eggs. I used to have trouble remembering to get them out in time for them to be room temp. But now that I've got laying hens, I have room temperature eggs all the time sitting on the counter. It is really satisfying to be able to make this recipe this year with my own eggs, because I didn't have that last year. Now I'm going to keep the speed on low. This is where you want to start trying to avoid over mixing. You just want to mix enough to combine, because now things affect the texture of the cheesecake. This is the point where the recipe calls for pulling out some of the batter and flavoring it with pumpkin, and then that becomes the swirl in the pumpkin swirl. But last year I was in a hurry. I don't always read directions well. And so I just put the pumpkin straight into the cheesecake, and I really liked it. I don't actually want the swirl. I want the whole cheesecake to taste like pumpkin. So I'm gonna put those pumpkin ingredients right into the mixer, save myself a step, and it'll be delicious. So I'm adding a cup of pumpkin puree. 1.5 teaspoons cinnamon, and back to the pumpkin pie spice, 1.5 teaspoons of that as well. John just got back with the butter, so now we can make the crust. It's a ginger snap crust. I really like it. I know graham cracker crusts are common for cheesecakes, but I think this ginger snap crust is just perfect. So I'm going to measure out some ginger snap cookies. Cookies are hard to measure with a cup measure, so fortunately the recipe also gives weights. I'm just going to weigh this. I need 180 grams. There are a few cookies that just aren't combining. I'm going to try adding the other ingredients. I think it might help to just have more substance in here. I'm adding a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. If you hear that sizzling in the background, that's just my butter melting. 1/4 teaspoon of ginger. A 1/4 cup of melted butter. The recipe calls for unsalted. I'm using salted. I don't mind a little bit of salty flavor in that crust. I think that'll actually be nice. And I think we can get a 1/4 cup sugar out of this last little bit. Hopefully that will help those last few cookies to be incorporated. Let's see if it works. That did help. There's still a few cookies that aren't incorporated. I'm just going to call them a loss. It's fine. And I'm ready to press this into my springform pan. I'm using a 10-inch springform pan. I've been wanting one for a while, but was kind of tired of buying things for the kitchen. It seems like the list is never ending. Anyhow, I just found one at a thrift store for $2, and it's a nice one. So I'm pleased with that. If you've not used a springform pan before, it took me some time to figure out how to open it and then close it properly. So if the bottom is properly in place, once you've closed the clip, you shouldn't be able to push the bottom up or down. I've made the mistake before of not having it in properly. It kind of ruins things. All right, let's get the crust in. There's no need to grease the pan. There's so much butter in this mixture that it will lift off. And I know I'm using my hands a lot here. I just washed them. I just need to use my hands to be able to press this crust into place properly. So the crust should go a little bit up the sides of the pan. So that it kind of covers the gap between the bottom of the pan and the side. It's going into the oven for 10 minutes. While that crust is in the oven, I'm going to prepare the water bath. This was a step that was new to me the last time I made this cheesecake, and I've done it a couple times since now. And it does make for a really good texture in a cheesecake. So if it's new to you, don't be daunted. It's doable. I'm going to start with some tin foil. The directions say to use a large piece. I've found that my tin foil is just too narrow for the size of my springform pan, so I'm going to make an X out of this foil, and that'll allow the foil to go around and up the sides of the springform pan. The crust just came out of the oven, so I'm ready to wrap it up. It can be handled at this point. I'm just going to bring everything up around it so that once it's in the water bath, there's no spot where water can actually get into the bottom of the cheesecake. From my roasting pan. Oof, I cannot wait to have this. My family's celebrating Thanksgiving early this year because John and I are going to Texas on Thanksgiving. And now we've had trouble coordinating our schedules, so we might actually celebrate Thanksgiving with my family in October. So I won't have long to wait before we can eat this. The last step before this goes into the oven is filling this pan with 1 inch of boiling water. So I've got some boiling water here, and I'm just going to carefully pour it in so there's 1 inch on the bottom. I have to be really careful as I get this into the oven to just keep it level. I don't want the water splashing up the sides. A cheesecake is work. It's doable, but it does take time. I was just looking at the recipe and remembered that once this is done baking, I also need to crack the oven door and let it cool in the oven for an hour. That keeps the cheesecake from cracking, from cooling too fast. So we're on our way, but this has several more steps to go. I'm ready to start the last pumpkin recipe for the day, something savory. We're going to make a pumpkin manicotti dish. I love Jovial for gluten-free manicotti, or gluten-free pasta, sorry. Of course, you could use just any kind of manicotti that you like. We're going to start with parboiling the manicotti. So these noodles are going to cook for 4 minutes. That's enough to partially cook them, and then they'll cook the rest of the way when the dish bakes. Oh, that pot's not big enough. Let me switch that over. I'll get these going in a bigger pot. I really don't want to break them. So once that's boiling, I'll set a timer for 4 minutes. While the manicotti cooks, I'm going to mix up the pumpkin cream sauce. This will go over top of the manicotti. The recipe calls for a can of pumpkin puree. The can is a little bit under 2 cups. I'm just going to do 2 cups. I'm not worried about this being super precise. If I were baking, I'd be more careful. Get that last little bit. It's amazing how when you've grown something and cooked it and pureed it, you don't want to waste anything. And I need 2 cups of heavy whipping cream. This container is 2 cups, so I don't need to measure that. And we're going to get one more use for the pumpkin pie spice. It's going in everything today, so we need a teaspoon of that. This stuff is versatile. It goes sweet and savory. And then it calls for salt and pepper to taste. So I'm just going to estimate and see if I like that. I'm going to give this a taste, see if it needs more salt and pepper. I think I'll add a little more salt. The manicotti is done, the cream sauce is done, time to make the filling. I'm just adding a bit of olive oil to the pan. I recently bought a gallon of olive oil for the first time. Wasn't sure if that is a ridiculous size for me to have, but it turns out not, because it's been a couple months and I'm most of the way through it. We'll need more of that soon. All right, I'm gonna add some pork sausage to the pan and just brown it in the olive oil. When I'm browning meat, I like letting it sit long enough that the bottom has caramelized a bit. That is the good stuff. The meat is cooked, but I'm gonna have to pipe this mixture into the manicotti. So I'm just thinking about the fact that there's some large chunks here. I'm gonna work on breaking them up so that I can hopefully pipe this with an icing piping bag. The mixture, the stuffing is ready, the filling is ready to be finished. So I've got my meat in smaller pieces now. Next ingredient is a half can of pumpkin. I'm not working with cans, so I'm just going to add a cup. Then it calls for 4 ounces of ricotta. I don't really like when I get measurements in ounces for things that come often in different sizes. This is not a 4-ounce can, so 4 ounces is half a cup. As I'm making this, I'm excited to eat it, but I'm already realizing I think this is going to be a stretch for my kids. It might have been ambitious of me to think that I can make this for the whole family. I'll let them eat hot dogs tonight if they try a bite of this, and it's just not something they can do. Let's see, what else do I need? Next is a cup of mozzarella. I'm just going to do a generous handful. Sometimes not measuring is the thing that gives me energy to keep cooking. Then I need some salt and pepper, and I'm going to grab some spinach. I'm adding about a cup of chopped spinach. I'll do a little extra. Look at those colors. Mix this up. I think I'm going to enjoy this, whether or not the whole family's on board. This is not the type of thing I normally make for dinner. I often do a meat, a starch, and a veg. So it's nice to break out and just do things a little bit differently. I think sometimes you get in a dinner rut. You're just kind of doing the same thing over and over. Just try to bite, excuse me. And I think I'm gonna add a little onion powder and garlic powder to this. The meat is really savory and delicious, and then the rest of it feels a little bit sweeter with the pumpkin and the cheeses, and so I think I just want a little onion and garlic powder in the sauce. Onion and garlic powder are definitely my go-tos if I just want something to have a little more flavor and I'm not sure what kind of flavor I want. Just an easy way to give a little more depth to a salty dish. Ooh, yikes. That came out fast. I opened the wrong end. Oh, well. All right, let me get a fork. See if I like this flavor better. It's not short on garlic. I got a little too much in there, but everything else is good. I've got my piping bag. This mixture is really thick, so I'm going to cut it off pretty high up, but I'm going to fill it first. Let me get my dish so I can fill these. All right, I cleaned up a little bit because I knew I'd enjoy this last step more in a clear space. So I'm going to start with getting half of my pumpkin cream sauce in the bottom of the dish. This is just a 9x13 Pyrex. I've been finding these at thrift store lately. I use them to make meals that I sometimes freeze. All right, making manicotti is new to me, so I'll be honest and keep my mistake in. As they're cooling, after they've been parboiled, they should be separated. They get stuck. And I think maybe this gluten-free rice-based pasta tends to get extra sticky. I found that in other dishes. I hadn't thought about how it would affect these. I think I'll be able to get them carefully apart. Huh? That's kind of cool. It works. I'll give you a closer view. That's cool. My satisfaction from filling the first two kind of wore off as I continued with this task because several of these split. I found the easiest way to make this work was to pipe half the filling into one side and then flip it around and pipe half into the other. I think if I were going to try this dish again, I would actually skip manicotti. I did end up finding it just kind of tedious to fill, and I'd try to adapt this recipe instead to turn it into a pumpkin cream lasagna. All the same materials would be there, but I find it more fun and fast and simple to layer lasagna noodles. So I think I might try next time turning this into a lasagna. That is looking pretty, and there are a few more shells that split open, and I'm not going to try to fill anything. I think this might be more fun for my kids to eat anyways, so I'm happy to have some filling left over. The buzzer just rang for the cheesecake, so let's check and see if it's done. You can see it's still pretty jiggly. I'm going to give it 5 more minutes. Finally, the cheesecake reached a point where it just had a slight wobble in the middle, which means it's done. So now the dough needs to be cracked for an hour so that it can cool off slowly. Cooling off too quickly will cause it to crack in the middle. After wrapping up the cheesecake, it went into the freezer to store until Thanksgiving. I will probably serve this with a caramel drizzle sauce. I did that last year and it was so good together. It's really pretty, but also I want to eat it with caramel. It's delicious that way. So it's really nice to already have something ticked off my list for Thanksgiving prep. Getting back to that pumpkin manicotti, this looked beautiful coming out of the oven, and my kids were very curious about it, but in the end, they were not up for eating this. They did eat a little bit of the filling, and that went over okay with them, but I ended up supplementing their meal with some other kind of kid foods. So, unfortunately, this isn't going to be a family staple for us, but John and I enjoyed it a lot. I might still try adapting it into a lasagna recipe. I used some of the leftover puree to fill a pouch for my baby girl so that everyone could have something pumpkin together tonight. Thanks for joining me for a day of all things pumpkin. If you give any of these recipes a try, let me know in the comments. I'm curious how they work out for you. I look forward to sharing more with you next week, and until then, have a great week and stay well. Bye.